So what I've got for you today are some of the things that I have recently developed in the school that I'm at, because where I am, I'm completely rewriting the curriculum 7 to 12, so it seemed like an appropriate thing to bring in. And the focus in the school that I'm at the moment is that even though we have kids who are quite capable, there's been a history of very low performance. And most of that is because they haven't had this from the beginning. So that, even though we've had external exams in Victoria forever, in certain sectors, in certain schools, they still do not have that teaching and that scaffolding from the beginning. So this is what all of this is about. So, developing reading practices. Now this is a Year 8 unit that we used for the first time last year. And it was hugely successful. The girls, and I teach in an all-girls school at the moment, the girls were so incredibly enthused about this entire unit. And to me, as we sort of mentioned earlier, that's one of the things to me that's really important, that we don't kill text. Because even though, of course, you've got the external exam and that's what drives a lot of what we do, we can't kill it for them. So this worked really well. That didn't. Whatever's going on there. Anyway. So, Sean Tan, many of us are familiar with Sean Tan. He's a perennial favourite, and there's a reason for that. His work is highly evocative. Everything from Year 7 to Year 12, you can get a lot out of his texts. So, I'm going to show you 3 plates. And this is where we started with the girls. So, what do you see? What does it mean to you? And what is the story? Okay. And so it's plates 1, 2, and 3. What do you see? What does it mean to you? And what is the story? I'll give you 5 minutes. I give them a lot longer than 5 minutes. Yep, what do you see? Yep. What does it mean to you? And what is the story? I've got a ghost. It just follows me. Okay, so what do you think? Give me some starting points. What do we see?
See affection in the first one, hand on hand.
Yep.
Getting prepared to go somewhere. Is it action?
Maybe.
Yep.
I think he's giving her a promise.
Yep. And why does this suggest promise to you?
There's something in the box that we don't know, and it's something intimate between the husband and we can assume the wife. The way that he is looking down, or they're both looking down and their hands intertwined. They've just moved from a conversation with the teapot, and
Yep.
you know there's been some sort of dialogue, and now it's this. What is in this box belongs to us. I will do what I need to do to fulfill that promise for you.
Okay. Any other readings of the first slide?
Having read the text, it's hard to have that influence.
I haven't read the text.
Story is. So there's a definite air of solemnity in the room.
Yep.
I think, and that comes with the sepia tones as well. But there is a promise being made, whether it's about what's in the box or not is can be debated. But I think there is a promise of perhaps you see alone in the last frame and in the central frame as well. There's a promise of reuniting us, being reunited.
Yep. Some of the kids on this one, it's brother and sister. He's travelling, so it's not, the nature of the intimacy of the relationship is different. Because I showed them these separately, they had to do this individually, and so some of them were really focused on, is he going on a trip? Is there something in there? Is it a treasure? Is it whatever it is? So they did come up with quite different ideas with it. What about the central one? Where did that take you?
It's very confusion, being lost in a crowd, searching for something. There's busyness, which inspires noise. Noise.
Yep.
And unusual insects.
Yep.
So maybe going somewhere not well known.
Yep. So the sense of the unfamiliar, the sense of the busyness,
Sense of adventure.
possibly adventure. What about the faces at the top?
Could be looking in amazement at these different creatures.
Could be.
It's as if he's being watched, like he's been captured frame by frame.
Perspective of the angle of the it doesn't look like
Yep. And especially that difference between the angles of the two sets of frames. And this last one?
Alone, but surrounded by, well, not a lot of people, but there are other people there, but it gives the feeling of isolation.
Mm-hmm.
He's on a journey, yeah.
Yep. And why do you say he's on a journey?
Because I get the sense of the path, and he's sort of looking out, and you're looking at where he's going.
Yep.
Forwards, not backwards.
Yeah. And what other sort of...
Unusual creatures, so it's a real journey into the unknown.
Yep.
foreign.
Yeah.
Okay. And like I said, you give the little people a little more time for this, but they do come up with quite detailed stories attached to this, and sometimes nothing like what you would think, but they can justify it through the close reading of the text. And that's the point, is they have to justify it in terms of the text. This is the skill that we need for analysis, yes? This is what they have to be able to do. Show me what you've seen, tell me what it means, and what is the inference. So this works really well to talk about that. It also leads to discussion around themes and ideas. What do we think the text is about? What is the story that is being made here? Why do we say that? How do we get to that point? Narrative viewpoints, clearly the shift in visual viewpoint gets you to talk about narrative viewpoint, and how we develop character and how we don't get to see everything until a certain point in a narrative. So all those things really tied to analysis, but they think they're having fun. I always think I'm very successful for the day when they're left going, oh, that was lots of fun, we didn't have to do any work. Little did you know. Okay. Oh, for goodness sake. Thank you. Another one. This is a Year 7 unit that is what we start the year with. We use film and fairy tales because they've just come from Year 6. They're still adjusting to the whole idea of being in senior school. We don't want to overwhelm them, but we want to get that really, let's start, this is serious, let's get going. So it needs to have that sort of nice balance between the two, which is why we start with fairy tales. And I think a lot of people do. So we do start with quite a bit of explanation as well, and giving them the language that they need and the meta language that they need, but in a way that is not, hopefully, too overwhelming. So with this unit, we start with direct and indirect characterisation. And there's a number of different ways, clearly, that that can be shown. And again, film is a really accessible way for them to understand how characterisation works. And give them various, again, words, with inference being very much at the centre of what we're doing with this, because at Year 7, most of them haven't heard about that before. Many of them have been doing it, but they've not heard it explicitly. Take them through the various elements, make sure they're comfortable with that, and then we start doing various examples. So, what I'm going to show you, it's a very short clip, and the emphasis, what do we learn about the character? Use inference and evidence, okay? Because they know the words now, this is very comfortable for them.
Would you come forward, please?
Get back, you! Come on, Rufus, sweetheart!
It's not as understood you about.
Welcome. It's nice to have you here. I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you're enjoying it. I think you will. And now, will you please show me the golden trees?
Ivory and salt.
My dear, for look at what a pleasure. How pretty you do. Lovely new clothes.
I've got 3 hours to go.
And Mr. Salt, overjoyed to see you, sir. Would you just step over there, please?
Augustus, you!
Augustus, my dear boy, how good to see you, and in such fine shape. And this must be a lady. Just over there, baby.
Bye, Laura.
Darling child, welcome to Wonka.
Can I know you down here?
Charming. Charming. Sam Beauregard here, Mr. Walker. I'll get to a genuine section. Whenever you need anything in the automotive line, just call on Sam B. Phone numbers on the car. The Sam B is the guarantee.
I like eBay. Wow, you're dead.
Wonderful to meet you. And it's how do you do? What's an adorable little boy you have? Thank you.
Charlie Bucket.
Well, Charlie Bucket. I read all about you in the paper. I'm so happy for you. Who is this gentleman?
My grandpa, Grandpa John.
Delighted to meet you, sir. With joy and rapture and trance. Are we ready? Yes. Good. In we go.
Okay. So, how does characterisation work? Is it direct characterisation? Is it indirect characterisation? What have they actually done here in the film? What do we learn about Willie?
He's a trickster.
He's a trickster? Absolutely. Tell me how you know that.
He presented himself in a certain way at the beginning and changed it rather suddenly to
Yep.
an opposition.
Yep. So we interrogate that and actually show how we use evidence to support the idea that he's a trickster, which of course he is. And by the way, this surprised me. The kids love this version of Willy Wonka much more than the more recent one. They do not like it at all. So that surprised me, but there you go.
He's a
What
bit
else?
sarcastic when
Yes.
the children come through and he goes, "Oh, what a delightful son you've got."
Yes.
Patronising in a comedic sort of way.
Yeah.
No.
Yep. And we know that because. Why do we know that?
Because we use it in the club. Oh, no. From
Yeah.
experience, about a life experience too.
Yeah.
The child
But you're
was
12.
being quite rude to them
Yeah.
in some ways.
Yep.
The children don't perceive that he's perhaps being rude also, but
Yes.
we might perceive that.
Yep. And again, that interrogation from the outside, because don't forget, at 12, you don't have life experience to really necessarily know this.
Yeah.
So, how do we know that he's not being genuine? How do we know that? And, all that interrogation around that. But it's always going back to, how do we infer that from the movement, from the context, and always going back to evidence? Because, of course, with that end of year exam, the text response, the big thing that looms over us all, evidence is key. You can almost come up with any interpretation, as we know, if you can give me the evidence to support it. So it's always taking it back to that evidence, and from the beginning. We don't look at text any other way. So, with something like that, it also connects to analytical text response because we are looking at features of literary text. When we're analysing direct and indirect characterisation and the conversations that we have about those, we also see how they work within the events and settings of that particular narrative, how that context gives us a sense of what those features are and how we should read them, and how we are manipulated by those texts. Whether successfully or not is a completely another question, as we know, but how we are manipulated by them. So we're already talking about that from the very beginning again. We're talking about being manipulated by text, being manipulated by language. Okay. So this is also part of the Year 7 unit where we're talking about satire. Now, satire, as we know, is a fairly complex concept, but that doesn't mean they can't do it. We start with fractured fairy tales. So clearly, revisit the idea of a fairy tale. These are the conventions of the text. Go through all of that. And they're usually pretty comfortable with that. Even though where I teach now, we've got a number of students who come from non-European backgrounds, because most of them have worked or have come through, at least in part, the primary school sector. They're pretty comfortable with the idea of fairy tales. If they're not, and I have been in schools where they haven't been, you spend some time talking about what fairy tales are a bit more, and you bring those in and you...
Culturally transferable though. Many cultures.
Fairy tales? Yeah, but not like the Western ones that we're working from. So sometimes we just need to go over what that is and bring in those examples, depending on how recently they've been exposed to this form of narrative. And talk them through what satire is, of course, because they need to learn the language that we're using. And for the purposes of this unit, we gave them 4 types of satire. Exaggeration, that's pretty good. Incongruity, which getting their mouths around that was probably harder than writing it, but all good. Reversal and parody. So clearly one takes some time to go through all of those, give them examples so that they get what we're on about, all that normal teacher practice. And then, because Shrek continues to be a perennial favourite, can they come up with more contemporary stuff that I don't know? It'd be great. But anyway, they love it. So what we will get them to do is identify one of each of those 4 types. So, to make this easier, exaggeration, incongruity, reversal and parody. And that's what we're looking for. And the next clip that I'm going to show you, find one example of each of those, if it will work.
Thanks.
Well, eat up. We've got a big day ahead of us.
Fred, what? It's a compliment. Better out than in, I always say. There's no way to behave in front of a princess.
Thanks.
She's as nasty as you are. You know, you're not exactly what I expected.
Well, maybe you shouldn't judge people before you get to know them.
Princess!
What are you doing?
Be still, mon chéri, for I am your savior, and I am rescuing you from this green beast.
Hey, that's my princess. Go find your own.
Please, monster! Can't you see I'm a little busy here?
Look, pal, I don't know who you think you are.
Ah, of course how rude. Please let me introduce myself. Oh, merry man! Still for the rich and give to the needy. But I'm not greedy. I risk you pretty damsels. Man, I'm good. Take it down. What he's basically saying is he likes to get AIDS. Oh, and I'm not in the bush from the lady by the bush. That's bad. That's bad. That's bad. The beauty with the beast, it makes me up for it more. I'm gonna take my blade and ram it through your eye. Keep your eyes on me, boys, cause I'm about to start.
Man, that was annoying.
Oh, you little...
It's a great scene, isn't it? Okay, so what have we got? And again, clearly with the little people, we show them more than once because it takes longer.
There's an exaggeration of the French, but there's an exaggeration of the French stereotype there.
Absolutely. Yep.
Crouching Tiger, right?
Yep. And Matrix.
And all other fairy tales where the princess sings and the birds respond.
Like
That just makes, I mean, the blowing up the bird, it's so wrong, but it's so funny. Yep.
Can we say reverse? When Fiona rescues herself, basically, she takes on the male role.
Yep. And almost rescues Shrek because he's the one who's going to get beaten up by the merry men. Yep.
When she burps when she's cooking the breakfast, that's a funny.
Out of place.
Yeah.
They're all forms of incongruity.
Yes.
Yep. So, you know, and they come up with, because, I mean, that section is so rich with this. And they come up with quite long lists as to what forms of satire are available for them. Yep.
It allows you to really layer the differentiation as well. Like your role when the kids very obviously see that the bird exploding is exaggeration.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yep.
when the challenged archetype is the exaggeration too. So
Yep.
you can have all sorts of layers for every moment.
And that's exactly right. All of this, everything that we're talking about, massively appropriate in a highly differentiated classroom. You know, and part of the beauty of it, because you can very easily do that. And then moving to the much higher order stuff, which is, you know, what idea or aspect of society is the film criticising? And this takes quite a lot to unpack, clearly. So where would you go to start with on this one? Gender? Yep. So what sort of things would you bring out?
You've got the more feminine aspects of the men dancing, they're wearing skirts, tights, all of that sort of thing. Whereas Fiona is a strong one that's saving Shrek, kicking the butts for the guys. You know.
Yep.
So that I think would be a very obvious one.
Yep.
So traditional gender
And
roles.
part of that, them doing the Celtic dance.
Yeah.
Yes. And also the mimicry of the, what's that thing called when they do it in the pool? You know, when the you know, that's the one I'm going for. Yep. Yeah, with the star. It was just, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yep. What else could we go for in this? Because the gender one, and especially given that I teach in a girls' school, massive.
Yeah.
You know, and we spend quite a lot of time unpacking that and all the stereotypes and expectations and where they come from, all that sort of idea. What else could you go for? Yeah. Which is actually a bit more challenging to get to, but again, it's that differentiation. Some of the kids who really are starting to think already then go, oh, but then there's this other side of this. So it takes us to really quite deep conversation.
We've also got the critique of when
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, don't switch off. Don't do that. So what was that?
I said it's so much quieter.
Well, yes, but it's going to get hot. And again, how do we connect it to analytical response? Impact made by directors or writers for plot and characterisation, pretty clear. Features and conventions of narrative type, again. Production elements, satire, and the analysis of an actual scene to explain how this has an impact on the reader. All of which is higher order stuff.
Do you use each of these texts that you've shown us, The Arrival, Willy Wonka and Shrek, as a main text, or do you have a main text to support these units?
Yep, okay, so for this one, the main text is actually Princess Bride. So we move towards that through these other texts. So the Willy Wonka and the Shrek take us with Princess Bride because it all sort of connects. And then the final part of the assessment, so we've done all the background work, then we do a direct film analysis of Princess Bride, and we take excerpts of that and show them and talk about very specific parts of that text. And they're an assessment for that, because again, it's the beginning of year 7, short answer questions that go from the obvious right through to very higher order thinking. So you've got a lot of opportunity for differentiation, and we get to see where they're at with their thinking, and there's huge difference between, especially the last question, which is all around trying to take apart the conventions of the existing genre, and how do we see that, and what's the impact of that. You know, the kids who are really getting it will write a page on that. But it's very scaffolded. And then the last thing that we do with that unit before the term ends is we have a comparative paragraph, because we also have that comparative text as part of what we do in year 12. So they're starting to learn how to do a comparison. So we'll show say, the one that is, Snow White. I can see it in front of me and I couldn't remember the name of the fairy tale. When she's doing that singing up against this, but also with Princess Bride, there are, the stereotypes of the princess and, all of that. And they have to write a comparative paragraph. And so they're starting to learn how to do that skill as well. So yes, we do have a specific text that is the focus. With the year 8 unit that starts with the storytelling, what that leads to, they then, because a lot of our kids are first or second generation, they then go home and speak to their nonna or their nonno or their whatever else it is, or their parents, and they get background information, and they create short film themselves telling the arrival story of one person from their family. So that's more of a creation unit, but it still ties to analysis. And then once they've created their movie, they have to write, and it's a very short piece, justifying the choices they've made. So they're analysing their own text. So it always, even though these pieces are quite short, and that justification can be, 300 words. We're not talking about a huge text that they're writing, but it means that they're always thinking in that analytical way and using evidence to support why they're saying what they're saying. They're using inference, all those things. But yes, it always comes back to a primary unit. No? Because there were supposed to be 40 people in the room, this would have taken a lot longer with 40 people. So happy to take any questions or anythings.
Just based on your keynote earlier and the second session I attended, I just have a couple of questions about how you structure your paragraphs if you're feeling. I mean, I've been using PLT because that's what we do.
Yep.
I do find a benefit in young grades to having some structural but I'm curious, you made it quite clear that it wasn't a favourite of yours. And
Yeah.
I understand, I know that when I get my year 12 work in and I see X number of peel paragraphs, it's quite...
Yeah.
So how do you go about that?
So from the very beginning, we talk about when you're writing, you are creating an argument. And so every paragraph is an argument. So for the very beginnings, so beginning of year 7, tell me what you're going to argue that paragraph. Then do all the things that we've been talking about. Tell me why that's important, how that builds your overall argument, and give me some examples about how that works. And then tell me how that fits. Explicitly tell me how that fits with your overall contention, your overall argument. So it's about the idea, and it takes it away from that formulaic thing where it's not thinking. I just do a topic sentence and then I put evidence in, and then I link it back to whatever, because it depends who you talk to, what you're supposed to link it to. But that sense of you are building an argument, and it's much easier for them to go from that, which is a little bit formulaic, to year 12 where they're completely building their own contention through some, fairly high order thinking. Correct. And it gives them space to move more effectively.
How do you go with marking that without a framework for you to be looking for particular things?
Yep.
So as an experienced educator, it's easy to tell when an essay is good and when an essay is bad.
Yep.
But what are your frameworks like in that regard?
Okay, so in Victoria we use a lot of global grading. I don't know what you use up here. No? So it's really, okay, so for VCE, at year 12, we have a rubric for each of the things. That's fine. And so the one that I've just finished marking is the text response that is done in class. So this text response gets replicated in the exam. They have to do one in the exam as well, but we also do what we call SACs, so school assessed coursework, that is a text response. The rubric is split into 4 dimensions, and there's a range of sort of 5, so it goes from very low to very high. But there's no mark attached to each part of that rubric. It's about, okay, let's look at that. Yet you seem to be really good at this. This is a bit weaker, whatever. Yep, you pretty much sit in the medium band or the high band or whatever it is. And when you compare it to everyone else, because with Victoria it's ranked, compare it to everyone else in your cohort, this is where you sit.
Is there one thing in that rubric that says structure?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking for. What is that structure? What does that
But-
structure look like to you compared to us?
But that's the thing, it's not mandated. So as long as there is a structure and it makes sense and it reads well and it develops, and it does develop an argument, and as we know, when we're talking about text, that's what we're doing, that's fine.
So if it's like on topic, focus,
As evidence.
paragraph development, yeah.
All those things, yep. And of course the more sophisticated ones move through that more smoothly, and therefore they get rewarded for that. So something like a standard teal or peel response is probably more in the medium range, and depending on how badly they deal with that medium range, it can end up down there.
I think it's hard to, unless you're breaking the mold a little bit, it's hard to reach those lines.
Exactly. And like you say, as experienced teachers, we know that. Like instinctively we can read a piece and go, that's, that's not showing me thinking. And when we're doing the marking at the end of the year, the chief assessor for English, who has been in that role for more than 20 years, I think he's an amazing man. What you're looking for is the brain behind the words. What is the capacity of this writer? And that's how we reward, because it's all positive marking, it's not taking marks off. It's always looking for that. Yeah.
One other question. Okay, so again, in your keynote, and I highlighted this, I'm concerned, being new to the external exams, so currently whenever we assess a literary text, and it's a text response, they have either a set of quotations that they can bring in with them, or a novel that they can bring in with them. I'm really concerned about marking my students' memories.
Yep.
Okay. So you mentioned memorization of quotations. I feel really bad about that.
Yep.
Some people, I've been a language teacher for many years. I know how important memory is.
Yeah, and it's tricky, and I'm with you. I hate that element of the mainstream English course. Our literature course runs differently, largely because of that. So there's no memory in literature. You're responding to it's in a very different way. But in mainstream, yes, you do. And I have never been good at memorising anything. That's just not how my brain works. So I really sympathise with those kids. But so and it's training. As you know, as a language teacher, you know it's training, repetition. You know, early on, if these are the main themes that we're looking at with this text, these are highly appropriate quotes that go with that, never longer than 5 words long. And I don't know how they're going to mark it up here, but certainly when we look at evidence, it's not always quotes. So if it's really well explained how this fits and what else is going on and the context, whatever it happens to be, it doesn't have to be a quote. But you do need quotes through it, so you do just have to learn them, because you cannot get significant success in that sort of exam if you don't. And I agree, I have a problem with that, but that's how it is. Yep.
Yeah, just on that one, from South Australia.
Yep.
So I went through SACE 3-hour English exam as a student in 2009, and we always were told to form our conclusions and develop our themes and then go and find a quote, I guess, that sort of supports that. So
Yep.
the quote was sort of the secondary thing for us. It was the conclusion we would draw, but we would perhaps be able to draw from a number of quotes, and we do a lot of group work and what quote do you think supports this theme? So we
Yep.
sort of tried to make it not about like the quotes themselves.
Yes.
It was about the big
Yeah,
picture.
good. And that's part of the problem,
Yeah.
because the students who are weaker academically
Yeah.
just go blah with quotes at you, and it's, yeah, you're not telling me anything. So and that's why that embedding of evidence. Why do we use evidence? We use it to explain something, and that's where that comes from very early. But yes, there's no getting around the memory aspect.
Does anyone know? Is anyone offering literature?
Yeah, I think we are.
Does anyone know, like you said, your literature band runs a little bit differently in memories?
What I discovered just before is we do our Englishes very differently. Like they're distinct Englishes. So you've got mainstream English, which is also EAL, literature, which is a distinct subject, and English language, which is a distinct subject. So I understand that it's a bit different here, where English and literature are sort of equivalent.
They're equivalently weighted at the moment.
Yeah.
But they're going to be
But they're
separate
definitely
subjects.
different
They're separate
Yeah.
subjects.
One focusing more on analysis and imaginative text, and the other one throws in persuasive, complex pieces.
Yeah.
But they will be different text lists and everything as well. But do you know?
Totally, we didn't discuss that. But I know when I first arrived 17 years ago, the boys were expected to read quotes for a paper essay, and that was very much part of their homework. So from the moment we started teaching, we'd still group like themes or different things. We'd be going through it, and the homework was, and I remember then, to walk in the door and say a quote, and they couldn't go back to the end of the line. It was,
It sounds like the UK model, the Austin model, where they have quotation resources, quotation banks, and they spend a lot of time.
Yeah. But see, the thing for me is I don't spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
It's we identify as we go through various forms of what we're doing in classrooms, but that's up to you, because the higher order that's memory, and I have no control over your memory, so I don't really spend a lot of classroom time on that at any year level.
That's the expectation of students. You need to memorize.
You just need to memorise it.
Yeah, if you want a certain level.
Yep. And like I said, I understand the discomfort with it, because this should not be about memory, it should be about how you're thinking, because it's the system we've got.
Picking up on a couple of things that you said, I too am very committed to social justice. So I find, obviously my accent says where it probably come from, I find this model very interesting when, on the one hand, we are saying that we want to be equitable, but on the other, in order to do this well, it requires that you have a certain level of expertise in your native tongue
Oh yes.
and exposure.
Yes.
So I work in a school that is predominantly low socioeconomic. They do not come with the social capital that perhaps students that they're competing with, which it's sort of like.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
That come from the southeast corner. I'm from regional Queensland. I teach in regional Queensland. So how is this at all equitable, and what resources does Victoria provide to level that playing field, and I wonder what we will do?
It's not equitable. It's one of the reasons I actually have a problem with the system. And there's actually quite a lot of academic research around the fact that this is not equitable. So what fires me up is to make sure that the kids who are in a position where they do not have that social capital, for whatever reason, that the teaching is so exemplary that it can at least match some of that gap. And that's the passion, because it's wrong, but that's the system we've got. So, okay, if you're going to make them do this, I want them to have the best opportunity to do something with it. So let's start with the social capital, with that vocabulary building. You know, these kids are not stupid just because they don't have the words, as we know. So we have to more explicitly teach those words, but not just as in explicit teaching, like the Hattie model. So that's not that sort of explicit teaching, but embedded in what we do, making sure that we're really aware of the language that they need for later on. And so it is really important that we very consciously backward map at every level. And that's all I've got, because I agree with you. I do not think that this, and there's more than not think, I know these systems are not equitable. And I wish we had another one.
I guess you also try to make things relevant to those kids in your classroom.
Absolutely.
Like,
Yes.
And that's when things get really hard for teachers in those positions, because you have to think, okay, how am I going to engage these kids? That when they look at that screen, I'm just going to straight away go, what are you talking about? So I think, assessment, testing, public exams, it all comes back to
Yeah.
making it.
Well, even, I mean, I don't know if you know Pasi Freiberg's, working in Australia at the moment with, do we know who he is? No? He's from, you know how Finland's sort of held up as, yeah. Well, he's Finnish, but he's a sensible Finn, because he's not sort of saying, well, we should, and he's an excellent educator. He's not saying transfer what happens in Finland to here, because he recognises that's rubbish. But one of those things about that making it relevant and making it, tying it into what works in, and it will be different depending on the region you teach in, depending on the kids that you have, making sure that that's relevant to them is an absolute key to this. Just like it's relevant to us as Australians, it has to be relevant to all our regional kids. And even in Victoria, which is teeny tiny, there's a big difference between what the kids know in the country schools and what they know in the leafy suburbs in the east. And again, it's no fault of their own. So why are they disadvantaged? Because we go back to that testing thing. And the reason I'm quite happy that he's here is that part of his modelling is testing in and of itself is pretty useless.
Yep.
What we should have more of in our classrooms is play.
Yep.
And like I said, when you're walking out the door and they're going, we just had fun, that's exactly the point, because that's where the learning really does happen. It doesn't happen when you test. But this is the system we've got, so let's try and work the system. Pretty much.
Thank you so much on behalf of everyone who is here. I think there are so many practical tips there, and you were able to give us such good advice, and I know I'll be using some of that we're doing Fairytale Unit right now.
Great.
So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really, really good.